In 1945, America built the smartest bomb in the world. It could find its own target, adjust its own flight, a weapon so advanced that it didn't even need a pilot. There was only one problem. It couldn't explode. They called it Bat, the wonder child of American science. A guided bomb so sophisticated that the Navy claimed it could see through clouds, storms, and darkness. A flying brain designed to hunt ships on its own. It was supposed to be the weapon that ended the war without mistakes, without mercy, and most importantly, without humans. Because by 1945, the United States had started to believe something dangerous, that machines, unlike men, wouldn't fail. That's what the posters said. That's what the engineers promised. And that's what the generals wanted to believe. America in 1944 wasn't just fighting Japan, it was fighting imperfection. The entire nation had become one vast laboratory of control. Bell Labs was building radar brains. RCA was wiring new guidance systems. In New Jersey, young women soldered radio circuits that would decide life or death an ocean away. The plan was simple. If humans were unpredictable, replace them. The machine would think, act, and kill with scientific precision. The weapon of the future was ready, and the future couldn't wait. April 1945. The skies over the Philippines. A Navy bomber takes off carrying the first Bat bomb under its wing. The crew doesn't know what to expect. They've been told the bomb will fly itself. Just drop it and watch. At 8:47 a.m., the bombardier releases the weapon. The radar activates. The wings adjust. The bomb dips and turns toward the target, a Japanese frigate, cutting through the waves. For a second, it works. Then the signal vanishes. The Bat tilts, spirals, and dives. No explosion. No splash of victory. Just a few seconds of silence before the sea swallows another $20,000 experiment. The Navy's reports called it unsatisfactory but promising. Bell Labs called it technically sound, with operational limitations. And the factories? They didn't call it anything, they just kept producing. Because when America's machines failed, the solution was always the same. Build more of them. So they did. 3,000 more Bats rolled off the assembly lines, weapons that couldn't win a single fight, but looked great in a report. It was faith disguised as efficiency. And faith is a dangerous thing in the hands of engineers. The Bat didn't die because it was stupid. It died because the people who built it believed they were too smart to fail. Rain confused the radar. Tropical heat warped the sensors. And the sea, that endless, indifferent machine of nature, swallowed the logic of men whole. The Bat's downfall wasn't a malfunction. It was a mirror. It reflected the arrogance of a civilization convinced that intelligence was the same as wisdom. When the war ended, the program disappeared overnight. No headlines, no medals, no glory. Just a few crates sealed in naval depots marked obsolete. But failure never dies in America, it just gets rebranded. The same engineers went on to design the first cruise missiles, early drones, and computer guidance systems. The Bat failed to hit its target. But it hit something else, the beginning of a new kind of warfare, one where control mattered more than understanding. Today, divers still find them off the Philippine coast, gray shells lying perfectly preserved on the seabed. They look asleep, not dead. Their radar eyes still intact, their aluminum bodies untouched by time. Silent proof that progress doesn't always decay, sometimes it just waits. The Bat didn't explode, but its idea did quietly, relentlessly, in every missile, drone, and algorithm that followed. America built a bomb that couldn't think, and accidentally invented the age of thinking machines. By 1942, America was no longer a country, it was an engine, an industrial organism that breathed steel and exhaled victory slogans. Its cities thundered with the rhythm of mass production. Detroit built tanks instead of cars. Pittsburgh's furnaces glowed day and night, feeding the war like a living volcano. Every bolt, every screw, every drop of fuel had a purpose to prove that the system works. And at the heart of that system was faith not in God, not in generals, but in the machine itself. In Washington's offices and laboratory corridors, A new creed was taking shape. If it can be built, it can be controlled. War had turned engineers into prophets. The physicist was the new general, and the blueprint was his battlefield. The logic was intoxicating. Humans made mistakes, machines didn't. Human emotions clouded judgment. Circuits didn't feel regret. The American war machine didn't just need soldiers, it needed obedience. And nothing obeyed like technology. This was the moral foundation of mid-century America, the sanctification of precision. Bell Labs, the National Bureau of Standards, MIT, they weren't just laboratories, they were cathedrals of calculation. Inside, white-coated men drew the future with rulers and slide rules, confident that mathematics could civilize destruction. To them, the war wasn't horror, it was a system to be optimized. When Henry Ford perfected the assembly line, he taught America that order could be mass-produced. By the 1,940 seconds, that lesson had migrated from the factory floor to the front line. Logistics became theology. Each soldier, each shell, each gallon of oil, all reduced to numbers in a flowchart. And in this world of perfect data, the Bat was born. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance wanted a weapon that didn't need courage or conscience, just coordinates. Bell Labs promised to deliver it. A bomb that would remove the last unpredictable element in war, the human. When Admiral Ralph Bowen called it the next step in modern warfare, he wasn't exaggerating, he was confessing. Because for America, technology had become a form of confession, a way to wash away the guilt of war by replacing blood with circuitry. By 1944, the line between morality and machinery had blurred. Propaganda posters showed women tightening bolts under the slogan, "Victory through production." Churches prayed for "our scientists in service." And in factories, foremen told workers, "Every screw is a bullet, every switch a life." The nation was no longer fighting evil, it was manufacturing efficiency. The concept of good was replaced by effective. Success wasn't measured in justice, it was measured in output. The Bat was the logical outcome of that thinking, a bomb not guided by hate or even strategy, but by signal return strength. It didn't need a pilot's instinct or a commander's judgment. It needed electricity. Inside Bell Labs, they worked day and night under the glare of fluorescent lights. Oscilloscopes hummed. Radar dishes rotated. Every new reading was treated like scripture. To those engineers, failure was heresy. Each unsuccessful test only proved that the machine hadn't yet achieved its divine purpose. They weren't building a weapon, they were training a mind. A small group of physicists even joked that Bat was the first student who never questioned authority. It obeyed perfectly, it just didn't understand anything. But that distinction didn't matter. In America's wartime theology, obedience was progress. The problem with faith is that it always expands. If you believe machines can think, soon you'll believe they can judge. In the closing months of the war, the U.S. military invested in more guided systems, radio-controlled torpedoes, acoustic mines, proximity fuses. Each one promised the same thing, certainty. But the closer America came to perfect control, the further it drifted from reality. No machine, no algorithm, no radar beam could truly comprehend chaos. Nature didn't care about blueprints. And the Pacific was nature's reminder that the universe does not obey equations. Every failed drop of the Bat was not just a technical error, it was a philosophical crack, a reminder that war is not a spreadsheet problem. Yet, even after the war, the faith survived. When the Cold War began, the same logic resurfaced under new names. Automation, command guidance, cybernetics. The idea that intelligence could be engineered became the backbone of the American century. From the Bat came the cruise missile. From the radar seeker came the computer vision. And from the belief that machines could control war came the idea that they could control peace. The Bat may have failed, but the civilization that built it never stopped believing in what it represented. A world where error could be eliminated if only we built enough machines. The Bat didn't just crash into the sea. It sank into the American subconscious. a reminder that every empire eventually starts worshipping its own inventions. By mid-1945, the Pacific had become the world's most expensive testing ground. Every flight, every bomb, every radar signal another experiment in America's war of intelligence. But the machines weren't listening. At the Navy's test ranges near the Philippines, the Bat was supposed to prove itself. Crews flew long sorties with their new thinking bomb, confident it would glide toward enemy ships like a metal hawk. On paper, it did. In the air, it didn't. Sometimes the radar seeker locked onto the wrong reflection waves, clouds, even its own carrier aircraft. Sometimes the bomb flew in wide circles, as if chasing its own signal, and more often than not, it simply dropped into the sea, disappearing in seconds. The test reports were polite, guidance irregular. The pilots were not. They called it the drunk pigeon. The engineers blamed the Pacific. Too humid, too bright, too alive. Radar waves scattered across the water's surface, breaking their neat equations. The bomb's vacuum tubes overheated, its circuits shorted from salt air. The Bat had been designed in laboratories where the air was cool, the walls were white, and chaos could be graphed. But nature doesn't care about graphs. Every failed test was a small act of defiance, the real world mocking America's dream of perfect control. Then came the irony. The autonomous bomb still needed human babysitting. Pilots had to release it at exact altitudes and angles. Technicians had to tune radar frequencies mid-flight. If the machine was off by a few degrees, the whole system collapsed. It was like watching a god that couldn't tie its own shoes. And yet, the Navy kept pretending it worked. The propaganda reels showed successful hits. The failures were edited out. In the age of faith, even data needed censorship. Back in New Jersey, the engineers at Bell Labs refused to give up. They were the high priests of America's technological church, and priests don't doubt their gods. One internal memo read: "The Bat exhibits promising adaptive potential. Environmental disturbances must be statistically normalized." Translation: "It doesn't work, but maybe if we ignore the weather it will." They added more circuits, improved the antennas, recalibrated the gyros, each tweak a prayer to the machine. But the results were always the same: failure with style. The Bat didn't disobey, it misunderstood. It followed its own kind of logic, pure and blind. It was the first time America met something it had built, yet couldn't fully command. When the Navy Bureau of Ordnance reviewed the numbers, it did what all great bureaucracies do. It adjusted the definition of success. If the bomb landed near the target, that was effective deviation. If it failed to detonate, it was data pending. As long as the reports looked promising, the system stayed alive. After all, the factories were already running, the workers were already paid. And in wartime America, momentum was morality. Stopping production would mean admitting that science, the country's greatest weapon, had hit a limit, and that was unthinkable. Only one Bat ever achieved a confirmed kill. April 1945, near Borneo, it hit a small Japanese freighter and sent it under in seconds. The success was real, but the lesson was wrong. The Navy celebrated it as proof that the system worked. In truth, it was an accident, a statistical fluke that bought the illusion a few more months of life. The engineers toasted their victory, wrote new funding proposals, and returned to their oscilloscopes. The ocean, indifferent as ever, swallowed the rest. The Bat's biggest failure wasn't technical, it was emotional. It taught America that even when the data said no, the dream still said yes. Every crash into the Pacific was another sermon in the new American religion. If a machine fails, it's not the system's fault, it's the world's. And so the Bat didn't end in flames. It ended in paperwork. The bomb that was meant to think for itself became the perfect metaphor for the people who built it. Precise, logical, and completely blind to reality. When people talk about the American war machine, they picture tanks, bombers, and generals. But the real machine didn't wear uniforms. It wore lab coats, factory gloves, and a clock on the wall. It was a system precise, tireless, and proud of its perfection. And inside that system, a small metallic creature named Bat was born. At the heart of the operation stood Bell Labs, New Jersey. It wasn't just a laboratory. It was an empire of logic. 12,000 scientists, mathematicians, and radio engineers working under the same fluorescent light, designing the invisible skeleton of modern warfare. They called it pure research for practical victory. What it really meant was, we'll invent whatever you can imagine, and some things you can't. Bell Labs had already built radar networks, radio fuses, and communication systems that stretched from London to the Pacific. So when the Navy asked for a bomb that could think, Bell didn't hesitate. They were already halfway there. A young engineer described the mood perfectly. It felt like we weren't just fighting a war, we were automating the world. They called themselves the priests of precision. And like all priests, they believed their god, the machine, would listen. Once Bell Labs finished the theory, the plans went to RCA and Westinghouse, where belief became production. Hundreds of workers assembled radar seekers in long, humming lines. The Bat's eyes, tiny microwave antennas, and vacuum tubes were wired by hand, mostly by women trained in weeks to handle components worth more than their monthly salary. Each seeker head had over 2,000 parts. Each had to survive flight, vibration, and salt air. Every unit that passed inspection carried a small paper tag tested OK. That tag meant faith had been measured, and faith had passed. Workers called the bomb the blind bird. They didn't know exactly what it did, only that it was supposed to be smarter than anything else in the air. They laughed when it failed. Then they built more. Because in wartime America, production was sacred, even when purpose was not. From the outside, it looked like chaos. Trucks of aluminum, crates of copper, mountains of vacuum tubes. But inside the system, everything had order. Raw material moved like blood through veins from mining towns to smelters to assembly plants. Data flowed the same way. Memos, test results, calculations, reports. No one person could see the entire machine. No one needed to. Each worker, each engineer, each officer performed their task, confident that someone, somewhere, understood the whole picture. But no one did. That's how systems work when they get too big. They stop needing understanding. They just need continuity. And the Bat thrived on continuity. Even when test results came back negative, production didn't stop. Because the point was no longer victory, it was velocity. In Washington, the Navy Bureau of Ordnance kept the faith alive. Dozens of project managers and officers compiled endless reports, progress charts, test tables, memos stamped confidential. Each failure required a new form, a new subcommittee, a new budget. In the language of bureaucracy, motion equals success. One report from June 1945 noted, while operational reliability remains under 50%, the concept remains sound and production continues in anticipation of improvement. It was a masterpiece of American optimism, a polite way of saying, it doesn't work, but we're too busy to stop. Every war breeds myths. For America, the myth was that industry could solve anything, that any obstacle could be melted, stamped, wired, or scaled away. Factories weren't just workplaces. They were cathedrals of order. Workers spoke of production numbers the way soldiers spoke of kills. Each completed unit was a moral victory, proof that chaos was being conquered, one rivet at a time. But the truth was darker. The more the system produced, the less anyone questioned what they were producing. The line between solving and perpetuating a problem had blurred. The Bat was a failure, but a productive one. It kept thousands employed, contracts renewed, and morale high. A dead weapon, but a living economy. In wartime propaganda, America liked to call itself the arsenal of democracy. But by 1945, it had become something more abstract. The arsenal of belief. People didn't work because they knew. They worked because they believed in the flag, in science, in the system. And the system rewarded belief. Each problem led to more funding. Each malfunction justified another experiment. As one Navy officer joked in private, The only thing the Bat can reliably hit is next year's budget. It was funny until it wasn't. By the time the war ended, 3,000 Bat bombs had been completed. Only a dozen were ever used. The rest sat in neat rows inside Navy warehouses, silent, perfect, and pointless. Every one of them had passed inspection. Every one of them had failed reality. When the production contracts ended, no one held a funeral. The line workers went home. The engineers moved on to new projects. The paperwork was archived, stamped, declassified, 1,957. And the system simply shifted to its next obsession: missiles. That's the secret of industrial civilization. It never stops. It only retools. Bell Labs would go on to invent the transistor, the laser, the satellite, and the network that became the Internet. Each invention carried a fragment of the same DNA, the desire to make thinking predictable, to make chaos computable. The Bat was forgotten, but its logic spread everywhere. It lived on in radar guidance, in automation, in drone prototypes of the 1,960 seconds. The bomb that failed to explode became the blueprint for machines that never miss. And somewhere in that evolution, something shifted. Technology stopped being a tool and became a worldview. The Bat didn't just reveal America's system of production. It was the system. A machine built by people who believed that perfection was inevitable, even if they never understood what it truly meant. The war ended the way most systems do, not with a crash, but with a slow, quiet deceleration. Factories that had once pulsed day and night began to cool. The last orders were filled. The final crates were sealed, and inside them, stacked like silent relics, lay thousands of Bat bombs that had never flown a mission. 3,000 machines, perfectly engineered to do something they would never do. In 1946, the Bat program was formally terminated. The Navy filed its final report: operational potential demonstrated. Further development unnecessary. It sounded like closure. It wasn't, because nothing inside the system truly ends, it just gets absorbed. The engineers were reassigned. The plants retooled for peacetime electronics. Bell Labs went on to invent the transistor, another step in humanity's long march toward digital control. The machine had failed, but the idea that birthed it had already moved on. Years later, one of Bell's radar specialists was asked about the Bat project. He laughed, then paused, then said, "It worked, just not in the world we live in." That was the most honest obituary the machine ever got. The Bat had been designed for a perfect environment, a sky without weather, an ocean without motion, a world that behaved like an equation. It failed because the real world refused to fit the model. But rather than rethinking the model, America simply built bigger ones. The Bat was buried, but its circuitry was reincarnated. Guidance systems from the project became the foundation for early cruise missiles. The same radar logic was refined for heat-seeking weapons in Korea, and later for the drones that patrolled Vietnam's skies. Each new machine was faster, smaller, smarter. Each carried the same invisible flaw: the assumption that intelligence could replace understanding. By the 1,950 seconds, automation had become a patriotic word. It meant progress. It meant control. It meant forgetting that control had already failed once. There was no explosion when the dream collapsed. No headlines, no scandal, no morale reckoning. The failure was too technical, too abstract, too unglamorous to make the front page. But in hindsight, the Bat marked a turning point. The moment when technology stopped asking why and started asking only how fast. The same logic that built the Bat would soon build computers, missiles, nuclear delivery systems, machines that could do almost anything except think about why they were doing it. It was the quiet birth of a new industrial psychology. Efficiency as morality. If it worked, it was good. If it failed, build more. The workers returned home. The engineers published papers. The officers wrote memos that no one would read. The Bat had no veterans, no survivors, no stories of glory, only invoices and patent numbers. But for those who built it, something lingered. A feeling that they had glimpsed a new frontier and that it was empty. One former technician later said, We built something smarter than us, but dumber than the world. It wasn't regret in his voice. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of realizing that the future, when it finally arrived, was quieter than anyone expected. By the 1,960 seconds, most of the stored bat bombs had corroded beyond use. Some were scrapped. Some were dumped into the ocean. A few were donated to museums that didn't quite know where to put them. They were too modern to be relics, too useless to be remembered. Visitors walked past the display cases, reading the small plaques. ASM-N-2 Bat, U.S. Navy Radar-Guided Glide Bomb, 1,945. No mention of the idea that made it matter. No mention of the failure that defined it. Just the technical data, as if data could tell the story of faith. The bat's death was not the death of a bomb. It was the death of humility. For 3 years, an entire civilization had believed that the chaos of war could be tamed by design. That if the machine was precise enough, moral questions could be deleted from the process. But war is not a circuit, and technology, no matter how intelligent, cannot save anyone from themselves. The bat fell into the sea, but what sank with it was deeper. The belief that control is the same as understanding. The bat didn't rust because it was weak. It rusted because the world kept moving, while the dream that built it stayed still. What the bat left behind was not a weapon, it was a warning. A silent equation carved into the history of industrial civilization. The faster we build, the less we understand. The bat was supposed to think, but what it really did was reveal how little its makers understood thinking itself. Intelligence, in the mechanical sense, is about prediction, turning the unknown into numbers. But understanding requires something machines cannot compute: context, intention, consequence. When the engineers at Bell Labs built the bat, they weren't just inventing technology. They were redefining intelligence, shrinking it into something measurable, programmable, and manageable. They believed that by simplifying the mind into signal and response, they could make thought obedient. They didn't realize they were simplifying humanity along with it. Industrial civilization has always had one moral law: if it works, it must be right. Factories run on that logic. So do algorithms. So did the bat. It didn't ask why the target existed, or what would happen when it hit. It only cared about the radar reflection, the echo that defined its purpose. That's the danger of every system built on precision. The moment it achieves control, it forgets meaning. A bomb that hits exactly where it's told is a success, even if where it's told is wrong. A civilization that optimizes everything eventually optimizes itself out of purpose. The bat didn't explode, but its descendants now do every day, with flawless accuracy. The bat's greatest lesson was not about failure, but about obedience. It obeyed perfectly. It did everything it was told until the real world interfered. That's what makes it terrifying. It wasn't rebellious. It was faithful. It was built to follow logic without doubt, just as the system that built it followed production without question. The machine mirrored its maker's precise, tireless, and utterly blind. This is how obedience becomes ideology, not through orders, but through optimization. After the bat came the missile, the drone, the satellite, the algorithm. Each generation refined the same dream, a dream of control so complete that unpredictability itself would disappear. But unpredictability is not the enemy. It's the only proof that something is alive. The bat's failure was not an accident. It was a diagnosis. It showed that even the most advanced civilization can be destroyed by its own logic. Not because the logic is wrong, but because it is incomplete. Machines execute, but they do not interpret. They simulate intelligence, but not wisdom. They perform decisions, but never bear their weight. And so we build systems that never sleep, never think, never doubt, and call it progress. The paradox of progress. Every industrial society believes it is moving forward, but forward is just another direction on a circuit. The bat was the first loop in that circuit, a machine built to make decisions faster than humans could, and in doing so, making humans irrelevant to their own decisions. That's the paradox of progress. The more efficient we become, the less necessary we are. The bomb didn't replace the pilot. It replaced the question, should this even exist? If you stand inside a modern control room filled with screens, drones, automated targeting systems, you can still hear the faint hum of the Bat's radar, not in sound, but in logic. The same cold confidence that if the data is correct, the outcome must be too. Every precision strike, every autonomous decision, every algorithm that defines worth or threat, all of it traces back to that first leap of faith in 1945, when America decided that control was more important than comprehension. The Bat failed, but its idea succeeded too well. Civilizations don't collapse when their machines stop working. They collapse when they forget why they built them. The Bat was never evil. It was simply honest. It showed us what happens when intelligence outpaces meaning, when a species that builds faster than it can understand starts calling that progress. And in that honesty lies its strange immortality. It doesn't need to explode to make an impact. It already has. The Bat was not the end of an experiment. It was the beginning of one. The experiment of seeing how far humanity can go, before realizing it has built something it no longer understands. The ocean doesn't keep secrets. It keeps evidence. Somewhere off the coast of Luzon, in the blue stillness below the waves, the Bat still sleeps. Its aluminum skin hasn't rusted. Its radar eye still stares upward, frozen mid-search, as if waiting for a signal that never came. Around it, coral has begun to grow, weaving through its wings like veins reclaiming a forgotten organ. The sea has made the bomb part of itself. It is peaceful there. Too peaceful for what it represents. Above those waters, the world has moved on. Wars no longer need pilots. Decisions no longer need people. Guided missiles fly further, faster, smarter. Drones circle cities with precision the Bat's creators could only dream of. Satellites map the surface of the planet, a radar field stretched across the entire Earth. Everything works now. Everything hits. And yet, the silence under the waves feels louder than ever. Because every successful machine still whispers the same question the Bat left unanswered. What happens when the system finally works but the meaning is gone? In control rooms, operators sit behind screens, eyes fixed on pixelated landscapes, cursors hovering over digital targets. A command is given. A signal leaves. Something far away disappears. The distance between action and consequence has never been greater. It has also never been cleaner. The modern weapon is sterile, precise, mathematical, righteous. Exactly what the Bat was supposed to be. It no longer falls into the ocean. It falls into silence. 70 years later, the same belief remains that if we can calculate enough, automate enough, we can remove the chaos from human nature. Now the equations wear new names. AI, predictive systems, machine learning, different language, same prayer. The Bat was America's first thinking bomb. Today, we build machines that write, speak, decide, and judge. We call them intelligent. We call them neutral. But neutrality is just another word for obedience. And obedience, left unchecked, always serves the system that built it. If the Bat could still send a signal from the ocean floor, it might not be a distress call. It might be a confession. A confession that it was never alive, but somehow became immortal. Not through success, but through the persistence of its logic. It would tell us that every time we replace understanding with automation, every time we build something that removes doubt instead of resolving it, we are repeating its flight. Maybe that's the real tragedy. The bomb that couldn't explode didn't vanish. It multiplied. Listen closely, not to the hum of engines or the static of screens, but to the silence between them. That silence is the sound of a civilization mistaking control for wisdom. The Bat was supposed to end a war. Instead, it began a question that still hasn't been answered. The bomb is still falling, not through the air but through time. Its echo lives in every line of code, every algorithm that claims to understand the world, and in every human who still believes that perfection is just one machine away.